The archaeologist was bitten by a venomous snake in the field. At that moment, Connor felt intense pain in his arm. As an experienced archaeologist, he immediately took out his phone, but it fell into a crevice between rocks. With no other options, he could only rely on himself, so he personally sucked out the blood filled with snake venom. However, this method was clearly just an emergency measure. What he needed most at that moment was immune serum, but he was still 10 kilometers away from the city center. Connor dragged his increasingly heavy body forward, barely able to keep his footing. In his panic, he found his small cabin, but Connor, who had lived alone for years, had no roommates. His consciousness had already begun to gradually blur. A few minutes later, Connor's limbs became completely paralyzed. Everything before his eyes turned hazy, and he fell into a coma-like sleep. Until many days later, Connor slowly opened his eyes in the cabin. Just waking up, he looked at the wound on his hand, which now seemed completely healed. But this didn't seem entirely reassuring, so he decided to go to the city soon to get an injection of medicine. However, when Connor went outside his cabin, he found his car was already covered in dust. Clearly, a long time had passed, but Connor couldn't dwell on that now. During his journey, he sensed something very strange. The once bustling streets now seemed completely deserted, with not a single person in sight, leaving only an eerie silence. When he passed by a supermarket, Connor finally stopped his car. Before him was a scene of complete chaos, and just a few meters away, a man lay on the ground. The man's appearance was not that of someone who had died naturally. His entire skin had turned as white as paper. Connor knew that during his unconsciousness, a catastrophic event must have occurred, so he continued walking nearby, where shopping carts were scattered around, suggesting widespread chaos had taken place. Connor looked bewildered, then discovered official notices directing people to shelters. Finding this incredible, he quickly drove to his parents' home to look for them. On the way, he turned on the radio and learned that he had been unconscious for 3 weeks. During these 3 weeks, a massive infection had broken out, spreading at a rate of hundreds of thousands of people per minute. The entire world had been paralyzed, and now he might be the only survivor. In his anxiety, Connor finally arrived home. The worst had happened. After pushing open the door to his parents' bedroom, a pungent smell filled the room. His parents had long stopped breathing, and flies were swarming around the bed. Witnessing all this, he fell into deep grief, sitting in the living room for a long time, unable to come to terms with it. After burying his family, Connor was convinced that he couldn't be the only survivor, so he began searching throughout the small town. Unfortunately, after several days passed, he had no success. It was as if the world belonged only to him now. He could take anything he wanted from the supermarkets, but living like this was driving him to the brink of collapse. So Connor prepared to go to other cities, hoping he might find some other survivors.